Hello everybody, and welcome to Ancient Architects. Please subscribe now to get the latest ancient history news and independent research from around the world. If you've been following my channel for the past 11 months, you'll know that I often give my independent opinions and hypotheses on ancient history and mysteries. I try not to be swayed by other researchers, whether mainstream or alternative, and although I'm not saying I'm 100% right about everything, I do try to use logic, science and facts to formulate my ideas. And now I've done the same with regards to the enormous Trilithons of Baalbek, a great mystery that most have a hard time explaining, including me. I've watched countless videos and read a number of articles on the enormous Trilithon stones of Baalbek, and the reason I haven't made a video so far is because I didn't feel I could add anything else to this ancient mystery that hasn't already been covered. I believe that these enormous stones were unexplainable, and therefore they must hark back to some lost ancient civilization that harnessed some form of ancient high technology. The experts say they're Roman in origin, but everyone else says they can't be. So what's the truth? There are three main questions surrounding the Great Trilithon of Baalbek. When were they quarried and placed into position? Why were they needed? And how did they get there? I'm sorry, but I don't subscribe to the alien hypothesis, and I'm also not yet convinced by the idea of ancient giants. I believe that Baalbek is a human achievement, and therefore each of these three questions must be explainable. In my opinion, everything must have an answer. So, in this two-part special, I will be analysing this incredible temple complex in the city of Baalbek, located in modern-day Lebanon, as I attempt to answer when, why, and how the three stones of the Trilithon were quarried and placed into position. I will look at the site objectively, and my conclusions may not be popular, but they are my independent views, based on history, science, archaeology, and logic. But of course, I'll happily read your comments if you leave them below. Located about 70 kilometers north of Damascus, the site of Baalbek is of considerable antiquity, but it is the large stones at the temple, especially the three known as the Trilithon, that have led to huge amounts of speculation, as they each weigh an estimated 800 tons. They are, without doubt, the single largest objects ever moved in the pre-modern era. The Megalithic Site is in the region known as Tel Baalbek, and numerous archaeological expeditions have gone to this site, starting in the 19th century primarily by French and German groups. To this day, literature is still being published, and the chronology of this complicated site is still not clear-cut. If you do some research, you'll know that Baalbek has a long history. The first German expeditions had been unable to find anything there before the Roman period, but later expeditions have discovered Persian, Bronze Age and Neolithic artefacts. In fact, there is evidence for 8,000 to 9,000 years of habitation in Baalbek. The central structure is the Temple of Jupiter, built in the mid-1st century BC, which is believed to have replaced an earlier Phoenician site dedicated to Baal, and then another in honour of the Greek sun god Helios, both of which some believe may have used the same foundation, but there is no physical evidence to back up this claim. After the time of Constantine, the temple complex became devoted to Christianity, and many of the pagan artefacts were destroyed. There were numerous subsequent phases of work on the temple site, and, as stated, the history and chronology remains relatively complicated. But it is these large 800-ton stones at the base of the Roman Temple of Jupiter that has led to the development of a whole host of hypotheses about their origin. If they are Roman, as we are told, how did humans move them? And if the Romans couldn't, who did? And just how ancient are these stones? Due to their colossal size, there is no proof that the ancient Phoenicians had the technical knowledge to move them. Therefore, some believe it was the work of the Nephilim, the giants mentioned in the biblical Genesis that were destroyed by the deluge. Others say it wasn't giants as there is no evidence and couldn't be humans, so it had to be the work of aliens. Some say it was created by Adam's son Cain, making it the oldest building in the world, whilst others claim it was the location of the Tower of Babel. The popularity of Zecharia Sitchin's research has led people to believe Sumerian Anunnaki alien gods from Nibiru constructed Baalbek as a landing platform for alien spaceships. But if you've seen my previous video on Sitchin's claims, you'll already know my thoughts on his work. He makes the claim that Baalbek is mentioned in the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is clearly a giant leap of faith like much of Sitchin's research. Whatever its function, most in the alternative history community claim the stones are truly ancient, that the large megaliths are more than 9,000 years old, making them fit with the biblical Genesis and the tales of giants. It seems that everyone agrees that Baalbek is pre-flood, a remnant of a lost ancient civilization, proof of lost ancient high technology that was used in the times that history has forgotten, and many have found it hard to argue against this. And then there is this, a single but truly enormous quarried stone located about 800 metres from the Temple of Jupiter. Known as the Stone of the Pregnant Woman, it has a mass of more than 1,000 tonnes. In its current position, it isn't in situ, and it is likely quarried from higher up. When you look at it closely, it is in an unfinished state, and possibly fell to its current position. It is logical to assume that it was left there because after the stone fell, the workers couldn't move it, something I will explain further in part 2. In recent years, another, even larger stone was found close to the Pregnant Woman's stone, almost completely buried. This is thought to have an even greater mass. Both stones appear to be the same as the Trilithon, though they were not completely worked into shape and finished, but what they show us is exactly where the giant Baalbek stones were quarried from. So, these huge megaliths were quarried, and if they were quarried, they had to have been moved. But the questions that need answering are, when were they quarried and how were they moved? I have to believe there is a logical answer. And when you stop listening to the noise generated by alien and giant theorists, and actually look at the science, historical observations and hard facts, it isn't actually a difficult mystery to solve. To start, remember, these stones are not solid granite or dolerite, they are in fact limestone, a soft rock that is easy to shape and cut, and it is also an easily weathered and eroded building material. The fact that the Baalbek Trilithon and the two that are still in the vicinity of the quarry do not show major signs of weathering shows that they are not of great antiquity. Look at the weathered limestone of the Great Sphinx, a monument that geologists such as Robert Schoch have analysed and proved dates back to at least 7,000 years, but it is also possibly much earlier. The Baalbek stones look very different. They're a similar rock type to the Egyptian Sphinx, but are still very angular with defined edges, and therefore haven't been subjected to thousands of years worth of wind, water or chemical weathering. And you can't even argue that the stones have been reworked, as the two enormous stones in the quarry also have an angular appearance. So, the first fact to take away is the nature of the rock. It is soft limestone and is still angular, with well-defined edges. It therefore cannot be truly ancient, and is certainly not from a time before the end of the last ice age, and this is backed up historically. Whilst there is evidence of settlement that goes back several thousand years before the Roman occupation, there is no evidence of Baalbek in Assyrian or Egyptian records. In the 9th century BC, during the reign of Shalmaneser III, a tribute list was made after a war between a coalition of kingdoms of North Syria headed by the ruler of Damascus and the Assyrian forces. Numerous cities were mentioned, but nothing of Baalbek. And this silence continues into the Babylonian and Persian occupations of the region, suggesting that the area was of minimal importance, which is strange if the world's largest megaliths were already in place and prominent. By the time the Roman general Pompey conquered the region, the place was noted by the famous geographer Strabo, but simply as mountainous with high regions controlled by robbers, with plains for farming communities. There is absolutely no indication of any great structure, let alone some of the largest stones ever moved. There is literary silence from a multitude of sources, and logically this suggests that this wonder of the ancient world simply didn't exist. Geologically and historically, the enormous blocks at Baalbek are not ancient megaliths, but can this be proved archaeologically as well? To date, the ancient site of Baalbek, we need to note what was built there besides the amazing western wall that houses the Trilithon. There are several temples, the largest being the Temple of Jupiter, which boasts a multitude of Corinthian columns. These are some of the largest columns in antiquity. The stone is sourced locally, but the columns are not single solid pieces of stone, but several pieces known as drums with a capital placed on top. Other temples, such as the Temple of Bacchus and Venus, also have these columns, a common occurrence in Greek and later Roman architecture. There is absolutely no doubt that these columns are Roman, and although that some argue that the Romans could not quarry and shape granite, as some of them are, this is far from true. There are many granite quarries across the Roman world, and they did have the necessary tools to accomplish the feats we see with the drums. Stylistically, the columns at Baalbek are clearly Roman. So, why is this important? The reason we need to know about the Roman columns is because when Baalbek was excavated and explored last century, a part of a Roman column drum was discovered below the structure, underneath the enormous Trilithon. In fact, it was even found beneath the huge stones that the Trilithon sits directly on. This means that chronologically, the Roman drum was placed before the Trilithon. Also, on top of one of the Trilithon stones, there is a drawing of the plans of the Temple of Jupiter, which was built over by the Romans when it was no longer needed. So, there are pieces of the Jupiter temple below the Trilithon, and there are drawings on top. Therefore, it is a reasonable assumption that the Trilithon stones were put into place contemporaneously with the construction of the Temple of Jupiter, a fact that ties up the geological evidence and historical observations. So, this means we can discount the idea that the stones were laid in the distant past, and the Romans are the most plausible people that could have built this fantastic site. They had the political stability in the region, the finances, and they did have the technical know-how. In part 2, I will explain just how the Romans could have moved these truly enormous blocks into position, without the aid of some kind of ancient high technology. There are a number of misconceptions and inaccuracies in the descriptions of the Baalbek site, which, once put right, show that the movement of the enormous blocks, although still an incredible achievement, is not quite as difficult as many assume. I'm sure that many of you will counter one or more of the arguments put forward in this presentation, but the fact that geologically the stones are soft, historically it wasn't recorded before the Roman era, and archaeologically a section of Roman column has been found beneath the large foundation stones says to me that this site has to have been built by the Romans, and how and why they did this I will explain in part 2. Thank you very much for watching this episode of Ancient Architects. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe to the channel, please like the video, and please leave a comment below. Thank you very much.